In 1916, Virginia Woolf wrote an essay titled Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, in which she compares the two. She begins the essay by saying that Wuthering Heights is a more difficult book to understand than Jane Eyre, because Emily was a greater poet than Charlotte. When Charlotte wrote, she said with eloquence and splendor and passion, "I love, I hate, I suffer." Her experience, though more intense, is on a level with our own, but there is no I in Wuthering Heights. There are no governesses. There are no employers. There is love, but it is not the love of men and women. I need to come on and talk about Wuthering Heights because I've gotten a lot of questions about kind of how to read it, what text is like best to read, and I feel like it is helpful to kind of, if you're tackling the novel for the first time, because it can have like a lot of unfamiliar concepts, to have like a starting guide at the very least. So in this video, I am going to list a lot of resources that can help you better analyze Wuthering Heights. That being said, I'll try to keep it as concise as possible and make all the sites and outside sources that I list very easy to access. This is going to be a guide that is good for people who have read the book and those who are maybe just starting it, or maybe you're like midway and really struggling. So I hope that this can prove helpful. So kind of starting from the very beginning of the book, chapter 1 begins in 1801, and so it's really important to not be super hard on yourself if you're kind of diving into the story for the first time with not a lot of familiarity of that era. So acknowledging that this happens like way in the past is kind of step number one, and then just familiarizing yourself with historical context, kind of like societal norms of the time. The setting is going to be one of the most important things that you can understand about this book. This is the type of story that can't really exist anywhere other than where it is set. And it's also something that marks it as a Gothic novel. So kind of going into what that is and what that looks like, Wuthering Heights has both been praised and condemned following its publication in the 1800s as being a novel kind of devoid of this morality. Now, the New York Public Library has a site that I'll put here that does explain in more depth and detail what a Gothic text is. So kind of beginning in the 1700s with the very first one, and then kind of dating down and explaining all of the different ones. If you're at all familiar with Jane Eyre, then the scene where Rochester emerges from the fog on his horse and they meet each other is like the perfect prime example of Gothic literature. Okay, so next we're going to be getting into the moors and kind of the setting side of things. There's a really great website. It's the Reader's Guide to Wuthering Heights, and it has a map of the moors and kind of where everything is arranged, just so that you can kind of geographically understand, like, it was miles between each of the residences that these characters would have been trekking in a day, and because of that, it's an area that serves as both a threat and a refuge to its people. It also has its own kind of societal rules, so they're not going to be behaving in the same way that we would see a typical novel set in London at that time. So I think once you have that, you can kind of begin to learn about Emily Brontë and how Wuthering Heights was initially published under a pseudonym. It was not published under the author's real name. It was published under the name Alice Bell. Emily Brontë and all of her sisters used pseudonyms whenever they published their works, so no one knew that it was actually women writing these fantastical stories. The New Yorker did an article titled "The Sublimely Inaccurate Portrait of the Brontë Sisters," and it walks through their history and addresses some of kind of the inaccurate portrayals of them over time. So it's really good to probably start with this one, because in my research and in my time in college and kind of like watching and engaging with the media, I've seen many different accounts of these women, but this one has been probably the closest to the truth for a lot of people. An audiobook would be really great in helping them understand the dialect of the region. there's a character named Joseph, and this has been like the most common complaint that I have heard from students and from like friends. And my sister hated Joseph as a character, and I would have to literally read aloud his lines in order to like ensure that she was understanding it. There's a really great audiobook on Audible, and it's narrated by Joanne Froggatt, who you might recognize from Downton Abbey. I really love her. She does such a great job in telling the story, very engaging narrator. I would say that she does justice to the story in this, and I think anyone who's struggling with kind of reading those lines, especially the ones that it's like with the thick accent, I think that just kind of investing or just maybe like weighing, maybe like I'll read the lines aloud or maybe I'll like listen to the audiobook for these parts, it would probably be helpful. Something else that I think would prove helpful is that if your book has a family tree, to utilize this. There are a lot of repeat names. Last names change, but first names don't necessarily alter. It would probably help you to, at the very least, glance at that. If you're struggling going chapter by chapter, understanding what you've read, or like retaining or comprehension, I would recommend using a site like Lit Charts, which is going to break down everything. It does do a chapter by chapter breakdown. It has a lot of the themes, but be careful because if you misclick, which can be very easy, you might spoil something for yourself.